than the usual sorts of things that I do. Now, just to let you know, I don't really have a script. I don't really have any idea where I'll be going with this. I'm just gonna start talking, and eventually I'll stop talking. There is a certain sort of feeling I've been having lately with regards to social media in particular, but the more broad media and social, societal culture in general. And it's this idea that I've sort of had for quite some time now. But then in the last little while, I've seen some things that have really sort of elevated that feeling. And then today I saw some news articles and like the Substack opinion piece thing, and it really kind of drove this point home for me, so I just wanted to talk about it a bit. But it's the death of sincerity. Now, this isn't an original thought. I won't be the first person to point this out. But it does feel that in the modern, not only just media, but also social landscape, there is this desire to choose irony, sarcasm over sincerity. And I want to focus on the media aspect first, because I've seen all sorts of potential diagnoses of this. Now, I want to first talk about what I think is wrong. I saw some people talk about the hipster movement of the late 2000s, early 2010s. And they're saying, oh, this very insincere hipster movement. Now, as somebody who was, given my age, I was right in the middle of that. I had the mustache drawn on my finger. I got the 3D glasses and popped the lenses out. I don't think that's the case. In fact, I would argue that even that musical movement, at the very least, was a bastion of sincerity in a way. If you look at the largest sort of lingering successes from that era, you have, my mind goes to Mumford and Sons, Little Lion Boy, The Cave. There's a lot of sincerity in those songs. Ophelia, Home by Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros. So I disagree with the very widely held belief that hipster movement was sort of the birth of this ironic, complete lack of sincerity. I don't believe that's true whatsoever. Now, one thing I did see is that there was sort of a backlash, and I saw somebody point out Titanic. So you have 2000 and, Titanic was 2000 or 99. One of those two. But you have this movie come out. It's the biggest movie of all time, and it is extremely sincere. It is tearjerker, very melodramatic, very over the top, very heightened. And then that at the turn of the Y2K millennium, you have Gen X finally coming into their short-lived period of media dominance, and you see the rise of things like South Park. You have movies like The Matrix, Fight Club come out. Kevin Smith rises to prominence, and now as much as, and I think this is the thing, it does almost feel generational to an extent, because I think the baby boomers, whatever you want to say about them, I do think they were a very sincere generation. They told you what they thought. And I think Gen X coming up in that 90s Nirvana-fueled counterculture, anti-authoritarian backlash. I think Gen X, and you look especially at popular Gen X media, it was all about sort of doing an about face on those big, sincere, melodramatic, heart-wrenching things that the baby boomers loved, because it was all about rebellion to that. And that's why I disagree with the hipster thing in particular, because in my mind, the hipster, that late 2000s, early 2010s subgenre was kind of the millennials' first and maybe really only lasting pop culture dominance moment we'll see. At the moment, it feels really like pop culture in general is very Gen Z dominated, even though they're still so young. So it felt like millennials never really had that moment where they had a sustained period of controlling the media ecosystem like baby boomers did, or like Gen X did. Because if you look at Gen X, there's still, South Park is still going, Family Guy is still going. A lot of those, like CBS procedurals, things like that, a lot of that is still all Gen X. What do you think of, like, millennial-led things? I'm like, what do you like, the Mindy Project? Like, I don't know, it just feels like that moment, maybe. But that's a different topic, and I'm getting off base here. But that movement, that hipster music movement, felt like it was a counter to that Gen X sort of political and social nihilism that was so popular with our parents' generation. You know, as a millennial, my parents are both Gen X, all my friends' parents are Gen X. My oldest brother is Gen X as well, on the tail end. And there is this very inherent idea of nothing matters, life sucks, then you die. You know, like I said, political nihilism, political absurdity, everything's a big joke. That's a very popular sentiment with Gen X. Now that they've gotten a bit older, that seems to be shifting a bit. Gen X is now the most reliably Republican voting bloc, and they've become more conservative and a bit more authoritarian as they've aged, which is very interesting because we've never seen that with any other generation in history before or after Gen X, to do such an insane 180 in their political and social identity, and thus far we haven't really identified what triggered that. It'll be a very interesting case study, probably in 10, 20 years. But I digress again. But now so, as a millennial, alright, a rebellion to the douche and turd sandwiches and all of that was sort of this, well, I'm feeling these very big feelings, and although this heartbreak that I have probably is silly and meaningless, it is everything to me, and I'm gonna pour it all out into the world, and this is this terrible thing I'm feeling. And even before that with emo and scene music, again, that was late Gen X, early millennial. You look at My Chemical Romance, their most popular song is I'm Not Okay, being very upfront, like, I'm struggling. And you compare that, I guess maybe your equivalent to Gen X, just to go back to that comparison, you have like Institutionalized by Suicidal Tendencies, which is very tongue-in-cheek. It's full of absurdism. And Loser by Beck, another Gen X musician. Loser by Beck. Now, Beck does have some sincere songs. His music is, of course, always going to be a genre where you have to say something real. But I think, that there was that backlash to the Gen X irony, and now you have this Gen Z seemingly backlash to Millennial Sincerity. And now the comment I saw that, or sort of what triggered this whole thought spiral in the first place, was I saw a comment. It was a video somebody made, and it was them, like, they were explaining, the actual content of the video didn't really matter, but they were explaining something, like a pretty intricate and important, yet obscure political process. They were explaining a political process, a political institution that most people wouldn't know this piece of information. They wouldn't know how it actually works, and they were trying to kind of dig into the minutiae, the details of an actual life-changing, life-altering, very important process. And I saw a comment that was just kind of like, what are they yapping about? And to an extent, like, I do find that funny from time to time. Like, I can go in and, like, I have a friend I send back, like, reels, and we, like, that old brain rot humor, like, I've done a video on it, but in that moment, it's like, well, this is something that actually matters. But even in that circumstance, people now are unable to turn it off for even a moment. And something I've noticed heavily with Gen Z is that there's almost this reluctance to often to even try. Like, there's almost this idea like trying to do something is lame. And again, that's a very Gen X thing. And like, if you're very passionate about something, if you're very driven and determined to do something, it's almost frowned upon in a certain way. And I'm speaking very broadly here. Obviously, person to person, those things are different. But you see this a lot on TikTok. You see this a lot on Twitter. That's why, honestly, in recent years, I deleted my Twitter, I've deleted my TikTok, I deleted my Facebook, because I felt like the social found this writer on Substack. His name is Freddy DaBoer. Now I have no idea who this guy is. I don't know his political beliefs. I don't know what he's written. I've literally just read 2 of his articles, so don't accuse me of anything because I have read him. I think he is vaguely left-wing politically. But he has 2 articles I really like. It's called The Irony Human Centipede and The Left Can't Take a W because performative ironic cruelty is all it has. I'm actually interesting. This is actually going to be the most controversial video I've ever made. But hey, for the sincerity of it, so his first thing he wrote, The Irony Human Centipede. He has this, I'm going to just break down a couple things here. He says, resistance to irony these days is almost always immediately cast into a clumsy binary. If you identify some consistent and systemic problems with a culture in which literally everyone you encounter is emotional only about their emotionlessness and deeply invested in letting you know they aren't invested in anything, then you are assumed to be calling for a new sincerity. And then he says, my problem is that I don't know what anyone is saying anymore because they are so terrified of just saying, I feel this and it matters to me. And he goes on, it's a defense mechanism, it's a coping mechanism. Capitalism killed all my hopes, I'm entitled to this, I hate my dad. You certainly are entitled to live this way. The question is whether you actually want to live this way. How's that coping mechanism going for you? Is posting memes really defending you against the drudgery and injustice of a broken world? I'm guessing not. How many times a day do you have to evince derision without directly stating it to be impregnable? And how old are people going to get exactly before they decide it's beneath their dignity to live their entire lives in sneer quotes? You have people drifting closer to their 50s who get up every day and find somebody to dunk on. And then he concludes with, I have known many, many people in my life who live behind the mask of irony all day, every day. I have never known any of them to be a happy person. And then, so from his other quote, this one is more explicitly political, but I do think this still has a place in the conversation. The face of online socialism is some embittered grad school dropout doing irony at you, ladling out performative disaffection, making sure you all know that everything is expected by them, nothing exciting or surprising or scary. Their language is sarcasm, 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 LOL, 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 liberal capitalism, liberal, 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 LOL, LOL, LOL. Now that's obviously going a little bit more into the political landscape of things. But I think there is something there because I even feel affected by that sometimes and I don't want to be. So often I'll be engaging in a conversation with someone and I recognize it in myself. It's almost like a timer. If we're having too sincere of a back and forth, if I'm genuinely telling them this opinion I have, if they're genuinely telling me this feeling they have, and we're hitting that proverbial tennis ball back and forth a few too many times, I feel this sort of compulsion to make a joke, to undercut everything with humor, with self-depreciation. And I have to reflect, and I have to ask myself, what am I so scared of? Why am I afraid of letting somebody know what's genuinely in my mind? Is it because if I'm being ironic, if I'm being sarcastic, and they reject me? Well, they're not rejecting me. They're rejecting the mask that I'm wearing. But if I'm being sincere, if I'm pouring out my heart and soul, and they reject me, well, now they are rejecting me. Maybe. And you have to admit there is a discomfort in lingering in those spaces for too long. But I think we have to ask ourselves why we feel that discomfort, because to take that point from his first comment, I'm at the tail end of millennials. My year is technically the final year of millennials. I am 30 years old. The oldest people in my generation to still be considered millennials, they are almost 50 years old. And you see them online, on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok, still doing this. And like I said, I thought that millennials did have this sort of sincerity movement, and I think we did, but we've got infected by the same brain worm that Zoomers brought into well, they didn't bring it in, Gen X brought it in. I'm sure it existed before them, but it's been swimming around the proverbial swimming pool, and now we've all been infected by it. But how are you going to be almost 50 years old and still not having a single sincere thought, a single sincere feeling, not having a single person in your life know what you actually think or feel about anything? You're going to die having never expressed anything real in your life to anybody that matters. And you see it in relationships. I think it's a huge contributor to why relationships are failing faster than ever nowadays. Why people aren't having children nowadays. Because how could you? And of course, there's the economic element to this. There's the global, writ large, geopolitical, socio-economic instability. I'm not discounting that. You see a world that's on fire, and, well, we might as well make a big joke of it as we all burn to ash. But I think there has to come a point where you say, nah, it's time to just be real. And I think to a point I do try and do this on this channel, probably not as enough as I should. I've done videos in the past, talking about life experiences I've had, talking about issues I've overcome, and I've had people reach out to me privately, telling me how much those videos helped them, and how much, it meant to them. So I think there is room for more sincerity in all of our lives, and I think I'm gonna try and be better about that here. And, yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I didn't have a nice, concise little box to put all of these, thoughts into. But I don't know, I guess it's just the well, that just happened, which, people, that line has never actually been said, but, it's like the Marvel movies having to undercut any sort of emotional moment with a joke or something of that nature, and people have just adopted that into their colloquial speech. And I've even noticed it in Disney movies, because I was going back and I was watching some of the older Disney films from when I was a kid and prior. And heavy emotional moments, the sad moments, they're allowed to linger. Because you have to teach kids it's okay to be sad. Like, think about Lion King, Mufasa dying, and the reaction to that. But if you look at modern Disney movies, anytime there's a moment of genuine negative emotion, sadness, anger, fear, it is never allowed to linger. It is immediately undercut with a joke. And I think that's really bad for the development of children emotionally, but even through to adults, because if you're a child, that what you're consuming does not allow you to feel feelings, you're going to become an adult that does not know how to handle feelings, and you're going to become, it's stunted development. I almost said arrested development, but it's stunted emotional development. And it does feel like there's so many people who are so stunted in their emotional development nowadays. You have people who are all ego, no substance, and the thin veneer that's holding their existence together would crack if they said anything that actually meant anything to them. And I just think that really sucks. Anyway, guys, try and be sincere if you can, but I understand if you can't. That's all I have to say here. Thank you so very much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this almost every single day. Until next time, guys. Bye bye.